smart. I do need 2 ports though, because
Jeez, I don't have
ASMR mics have 2
popular.
ports.
I don't have a good
Actually, I
stream
might
title,
only need
but
1 port.
wait, let me get this
And
video up.
can I
I
like
guess I'll
down mix
start with
things
fourth
to
game.
be?
All right, so I've played a
It
lot of
records
Wayfinder. A couple
in
months.
Wait, is this
stereo.
sponsored? Yeah, I just wanted to make sure he could actually speak his mind on the game. Doesn't look sponsored to me. So is Wayfinder good? Very curious. Let me get the window capture going. There. Where's my audio capture on? Okay, it is. Sweet.
Months ago, I was in the beta test where we started from scratch.
I mean, people say it's like Warframe, and I like Warframe, so I'm hoping the magic can happen with this game. Be like superficially like Warframe. I'm not sure if it's like really like Warframe because I haven't seen them like do like crazy movement or anything. But I mean, we'll see his opinion. Let me just check everything is a check. I mean, I could make it fit better. Wait, is this? Okay. All right. Let's do it.
Leveling up fresh accounts and progressing through the game at more of a natural pace. But also, just last week, I got to go hands-on with a fully unlocked and upgraded account. I had access to everything, every Wayfinder, every weapon, and I got to see all of the content that will be in the game for the early access release that's coming.
I don't because I'm not sure if I like that because I feel like the experience of like building up your character is like important stuff. Like I guess he needs to show it off instantly, but I feel like I would have liked to see him have the experience of like building him up, or at least play like the weaker beginning of the character and like the end version who can like do a bunch of stuff. At least for the sake of time, because I'm sure he was on like a time crunch thing. You know,
Out.
because it's probably hard to expect someone to actually level a character. Like who knows how long it takes to actually level in this game, and how much time he had. I have no idea.
Today. So with all of this playtime under my belt, I thought it would be good to basically do a recap of my overall thoughts of Wayfinder, but also give you guys a clear impression of what the game is, what is there to do, what is there to see, what's the gameplay loop like, and then also just my general impressions and thoughts on the game as it stands right now. Now, as a TLDR, I just want to say from the start, I do think that there is a lot good about Wayfinder. I really enjoy the combat. I like the
Oh, this is not gonna end well then.
encounter variety, the open world, the dungeons, and just playing.
Cause he's like bracing. Oh, actually, he said he played 80 hours. I actually just noticed that now, even though it's title of the video. Adoy, but so maybe he could have leveled from like 1 to whatever the max level is.
The game, doing the gameplay stuff has been a lot of fun, but I do still feel like there's a lot of room for growth, and I think some of the bigger pain points, which we'll cover later in the video, are bound to turn some people away. This is absolutely not one of those early access releases that feels more or less like a finished game straight out the gate. No, it very much feels early access, like it is content incomplete and could still use a bit more polish, which of course the hope is it'll get just that over the early access period, which they are planning to last roughly in the vicinity of 6 months. Now with that said, I do enjoy and like enough about what's already here to have had a fun time playing, with the intention of spending more time playing the game now that it is officially out, which the embargo is happening the same day the game is coming out, so that would be today. Okay, so let's start off with a basic recap of the game. The way I described it last time, which I still feel holds true now that I've spent more time playing, is that Wayfinder is like a combination of the grinding, character, and progression systems of Warframe, the MMO-light shared world spaces of a Destiny or Division, with a visual style reminiscent of WildStar and World of Warcraft. You've got action combat.
I mean, that all sounds cool. I do like the visuals, like this game's art style. I think it'll age very well.
With unique characters that you will take with you into these open world zones, as well as the instance procedural dungeons, where you will be grinding for resources and materials to make new weapons, progress your account, and unlock various new Wayfinders. And that basically is the game. PvE, action combat, grinding for loot. That is Wayfinder, but let's dive into some more specifics. For starters, one of the game's more distinguishing features is the fact that instead of a class, you are playing as a character. This is similar to how it works in games like Warframe, or how it worked in Firefall when that thing existed, or even how it works in MOBAs. Every single character has a name, a backstory, will come with voice acting, and has 4 abilities with a few passives. While there are some modifications, none of these things ever change completely, at least as of now. So if you are playing the rogue character Nis, you have the same 4 abilities and passives as every other person who is playing Nis. The specialization and the uniqueness and the opportunity for trying different builds and customizing your character, that comes with the weapon that you're using, your echoes, your accessories, the affinity and mastery selections, which we will go into detail about all of those shortly. But yes, just think how Warframes work or how MOBA characters work. That is how character selection works in Wayfinder. The game is launching with 6 of these to choose from to start. There is Wingrave, who is the tank healer hybrid. He's got taunts, heals, and various team support. Nis is the rogue archetype with dashing attacks and dealing shadow damage. Silo is like a mid-range, throwing bombs and summoning decoys. Then there is Senja, who is a gladiator brawler with grapples and melee strikes. Kairos is a war mage with a variety of mid-range spell attacks. Cool. And then the most recently added character, Veminis, is an alchemist dealing poison dots and also healing. Now, the character that I have played the most with all of my various hands-on time with the game has been Wingrave. Like I said, he is like the tank healer hybrid with abilities that focus on healing and supporting teammates, but also doing damage, which reminds me, this is not a holy trinity game. There is no dedicated tanks, healers, and DPS. Everyone is a damage dealer, but then you have your additional abilities. So even though there are 2 classes currently in the game that have healing, everyone does damage. It is more so about the style of damage you do with any group utility that you might also bring, in addition to the fact that you deal damage. So right out the gate, from those selection of 6, you will pick a Wayfinder that you find the most interesting, and you better like it, because the one that you pick is the one that you're going to be playing at least for some time. A big part of progression in this game is all about unlocking new Wayfinders, sort of like how in Warframe is all about unlocking new weapons and Warframes. It is very similar here in Wayfinder. They are pretty upfront about this as well. This isn't like a hidden thing. You get a massive warning right after the tutorial and before finalizing your selection that says, hey, character selection is permanent. From this point on, new characters will have to be crafted or purchased in the cash shop. Crafting new characters involves grinding for rare materials to create these 3 memories of the Wayfinder you want to play. Combine that with a little bit of gold, and you now have unlocked a new Wayfinder. Now, grinding for those materials, again, is a big part of the progression in this game. It's one of those main things that you're working towards. As time goes on and you play more, you will unlock more Wayfinders, getting access to a larger roster, which you can swap between on the fly at any point. If you're out like in the open world or in the city, you can just freely change the Wayfinder that you are currently playing. The only exception is whenever you're in one of those instance dungeons or boss fights. And yes, it should be expected that this will be a bit of a grind, or that you will be able to purchase Wayfinders. We know that this is the case because as of now, while the game does have a box price for early access, once it leaves early access into full release, this is going to be a free-to-play game, and yes, you will be able to purchase Wayfinders and weapons to skip the progression. That is how they're doing the monetization. Speaking of which, in the early access, with the game's seasonal structure, they will be having roughly 4 seasons planned per year. They have said that with every season, they will be introducing a new Wayfinder. In fact, I spoke with the developer, and they told me that they've got somewhere around 12 Wayfinders currently in the works, 12 Wayfinders in development, and they'll be releasing, as far as I know, at least one with every new season. roughly 4 new Wayfinders a year. It seems like as long as this game does well and continues to get supported, this will be one of those games that has a massive roster of playable characters. There will be a lot to choose from. So again, very similar to Warframe. But to start out, you will just pretend it's day one, which it is today. If you're watching this video the day it comes out, it's day one. You pick your Wayfinder. You think you've got your one you're happy with.
Wait, are they saying it's out now? Day one? Wait, let me see.
The other half of the gameplay experience, specifically the combat equation, isn't just the Wayfinder with the 4 skills and passives, it's also the weapon system, and this is a really big part of the game. So the game has 4 weapon types or classes of weapons. There's sword and shield, two-handed melee, ranged, and dual daggers. Each weapon class has specific attack patterns with various light and heavy combos, weapon swings, and different arcs, as well as unique weapon class perks and mechanics. The classes of weapons aren't just like they attack differently, but they also play differently, very differently as well, because there are unique systems for each of those 4 classes of weapons. And what's even more interesting is that any Wayfinder can use any weapon. There are 0 restrictions. So although most of the footage and trailers where you've seen, for example, Wingrave, I'm almost certain in every single trailer, official trailer, he's been using a sword and shield. But as Wingrave, you can also use a two-handed melee weapon.
I didn't know that.
And dual daggers. Even further than that, though, is that beyond the 4 classes of weapons, those 4 categories, every individual weapon has its own unique ability as well. The weapons are sort of like Wayfinders in that they are each named, have their own lore, and come with a unique active skill solely available on that weapon. So when I started playing Wingrave, the starting sword and shield that I had access to was called Vanguard. And outside of its basic light and heavy attacks, the combo chains, and the weapon-based mechanics that every other sword and shield has, it also had the unique shield bash ability, which would deal massive impact damage to any enemies directly in front of me, also dealing a lot of guard break damage. In combat, I would build up these charges, and then the more charges I had, the harder hitting the shield bash was. But beyond the Vanguard, like I said, there are other sword and shields, unique sword and shields, that have their very own skills. So those are Grim Harvest, that has an ability where you will lunge your sword into the ground, summoning up an eruption of bone spikes. Tooth and Claw lets you throw your shield, damaging and bouncing between enemies before returning back to you. And then there was the Radiant Dawn that lets you empower your sword and shield with radiant energy, extending the damage and range of all of your attacks. And as you can see, each one of these sword and shields with that unique ability really opens up and adds new place. It gives you a whole new ability to add into your rotation. I could use more than just one-handed swords and shields. I could use any other weapon in the game, and in fact, I did just that. Most of my playtime on Wingrave was spent using two-handed melee weapons. This class of weapon is a heavy-hitting and deals high damage to health and resilience, which is different than how the sword and shield functions. So while in combat with the two-handed melee weapon, that's also got this system called momentum, where the longer you're in combat, the more momentum you build up, the higher your momentum, the more damage your attacks deal. And then that momentum also plays into the two-handed weapon abilities. So I started out with the two-handed axe called Typhoon. Its ability, Shatter, would consume all of my momentum to perform a strong overhead slam directly in front of me, sort of like in a cone. Hitting an enemy with this would debuff them, causing them to take additional damage for 10 seconds. Then I switched to the two-handed sword, Titan's Bane. This ability was Molten Cleave, would have me slam my sword into the ground, which would split the earth and form a straight line of molten lava. It would deal some initial damage on impact, but then would also for a few seconds pulsate damage over time to anyone who continued to stand on top of it. Now, in the most recent build that I played, there were actually a total of 20 different individual weapons just like this. There were 6 ranged weapons, 5 two-handed melee weapons, 5 dual daggers, and 4 sword and shield. So there's 20 right now, but as with the Wayfinders, they are intending on adding new weapons with every single season, which is going to add a lot of variety. You know, initially, I was really concerned when I learned about how the system worked, where these Wayfinders were just characters and not classes, and they had 4 static active abilities and a couple of passives that would never change. But with the weapon system being as open as it is, with with any character, any Wayfinder able to use any of the 20 weapons that are in the game, with more to come. That combined with the other progression systems and customization in the game has really added a lot of variety to the overall gameplay experience, in my experience thus far with the game. On top of that, they've got future plans with the seasonal updates to add more abilities to the Wayfinders. I'm going to detail that when we discuss the seasons later in the video. But now let's talk about the game itself, right? We've covered the Wayfinders, we've talked about how the weapon system works, and briefly touched on combat. What are we doing with all of this? What is actually playing the game? Game like? Well, the game is broken up into two main parts. There is the shared open zones and the instanced dungeons. So let's start off with the open zones. The main one in the game is the Highlands. This is a decently sized, like, high fantasy themed woodland zone. It's broken up into several areas, each with their own themes and points of interest. There's the typical variety of fantasy enemies. You'll come across goblins, bandits, elementals, and wildlife. There are public events of various sizes and complexity, some that you can solo, others that require groups, along with various side quests and collectible resources to gather. It is a
That's cool. I wasn't expecting that. They'd have like an open zone where you can like still fight and stuff. I thought it'd just be a hub and you're like all like sitting there or something. You can actually do stuff. That's
fairly standard open zone with about what you would expect. You'll walk around doing all of the above mentioned activities. There's some light exploration, some traversal elements. You've got ladders and zip lines to get around. There's a bunch of hidden secrets that you can find. But for the most part, it's pretty upfront, pretty standard open zone. It's also a shared world, meaning that you will see other people running around. Not hundreds, but think about tens along the lines once more of the shared spaces you see in a Destiny or Division. And you will mostly be spending time in the...
They said tens. Kind of reminds me of Tower Fantasy. Really, because I think God, what's the maximum? I think the maximum amount on the map was like 50. So maybe it'll be like that.
Highlands as you move through the main campaign in the game, as you do side quests, and to collect some specific things for a few of the game's progression systems. Now, in addition to the Highlands, there's also this large town called Skylight. This is where you arrive shortly after the tutorial. Here you will find various useful
cool.
NPCs and crafting stations for making characters, weapons, consumables, and relics, which are part of the game's sort of equipment system. There's also this Echo Matrix where you can craft imbuements that enhance dungeon runs. And you're also going to find the entrance to the Gloom Anchor here, which is tied into the game's procedural dungeon system. And like the Highlands, Skylight is also a shared space, so you will see other players. And then finally, there is the Deepwood Halt. This is the third and final of the open zones that are going to be at the game for the early access release. This one is significantly smaller in size when compared to the Highlands, and also it doesn't really have much of anything to do. Like, there's not a lot going on here. It acts sort of more of a hub to the game's 3 snow-themed dungeons, or as they are called in this game, the Lost Zones. And this actually ties into one of my biggest worries or concerns for the game currently, which is just a general lack of open world content. There's really only those 3 spaces. But anyways, I want to talk about the most substantial part of the game, and that is the dungeons. This is really the biggest chunk of
I mean, just like with Warframe, I think you can do like not every game has to be like an open world thing.
content the Wayfinder has to offer. So these are instance procedurally structured locations. They're called Lost Zones, and you'll be running these over and over again for resources, currencies, and loot. This is where you will be spending a majority of your playtime in the game, as it is the primary form of progression and also amounts to a bulk of what is offered for playable content. While Wayfinder does have those aforementioned open zone spaces, the Lost Zones, the dungeons, are really what this game is all about at the moment. So unlocking dungeons is done by progressing the main story quest. After the intro tutorial, you are brought to the open world, where upon completing a few tasks, you are asked to talk to some NPCs and go out to find the entrance to the Codex Halls. Now, this is an actual physical location within the Highlands. So you make your way over, maybe you do some open world stuff en route, but once you arrive, you enter the dungeon, you do the run, which involves moving through rooms and hallways, killing some enemies, collecting resources, and then when you reach the end and clear the final room event, after that, the Codex Halls becomes available as an option to open and run from the Gloom Anchor that is in Skylight. And that is how unlocking dungeons for the sake of farming works in this game. There will be various steps in between, but once you reach and clear a dungeon as part of that main story quest, it then becomes available for you to run back in town, from which point you can just stay in town and keep farming them over and over, which you will be doing, because that is basically the game. That is the game, farming for progression, farming for wayfinders, farming for weapons, and any other associated resources and items to power yourself up. Does that get repetitive? Well, yes, of course it does. As it does with every loot farming game, sooner or later, it gets pretty repetitive. Now, Wayfinder's plan to try to keep things fresher longer is by making the subsequent runs of those dungeons different every time, thanks to the procedural placement of dungeon layouts. This more or less amounts to a varied combination of rooms and their connecting pieces. So you'll have some hallways that maybe lead into small rooms, and then maybe that small room has multiple hallways off of it going in different directions. On one side, you might find a big room that has multiple levels for you to go up and down with some enemies in there. There could be some hallways off of that, or maybe there isn't. Then you loop back and head in the other direction, and maybe you come across a puzzle room, or a room that has an event, or a mini boss, or some NPC, or even side quests that you can do within the dungeon. Every single dungeon has basically a set number of building blocks. You can kind of think like Legos if you want, and it's how they're placed together and how they're connected and how they are laid out, which will change from one run to the next, and that's how they are planning to keep things fresh. In total, with the early access release, they're going to have 9 dungeon templates or dungeon locations. There are 3 in the Aurelian setting, 3 in the Mines setting, and 3 in Reaver Woods, which is that second open zone that basically, like I said, is just a hub for these areas. I should also mention one distinguishing factor is the Aurelian and the Mines have a general structure of sort of hallways and rooms, or hallways and open spaces, where the Reaver Woods, the snow themed dungeons, are much more open. Lots of open space tiles that are basically placed next to each other. So each one of those locations, very distinct from each other, different tile sets, different visual identity, room types, events. There is some crossover here and there, especially in the theming between each of those groupings, but they are also each individually unique and distinct enough to be identifiable just at a glance. On top of that, variety also comes through difficulty settings, imbuements, and boss hunts. So upon successfully completing a dungeon run, you will then unlock its next difficulty tier. So you start with the first level, you clear that, you unlock level 2. Each of these levels will scale up everything within it to be tankier and deadlier. The harder dungeons will give you better rewards. There's also the imbuement system, and this is pretty cool. It adds another layer of difficulty by enhancing enemies and even the dungeon itself with unique affixes. So you will craft these imbuements. There are 5 imbuement types, and they sort of act like a resource to put into your dungeons, changing them up. So the shadow imbuement will make enemies blow up upon death. Solar will make it so that enemy attacks cause you to burn, dealing damage over time. Greed will put piles of gold in the dungeon. The more of this you grab, yeah, you get more gold, but then you're also going to take more damage throughout the rest of the run. The flora imbuement has toxic mushrooms fill the dungeon, which spawn large poison pools. And then finally there's chaos, which has this trickster that messes up with your run, giving you various debuffs. So as you can see, there are multiple imbuements, each doing different things. Adding an imbuement to your run makes it harder in exchange for better rewards. Eventually though, you unlock the ability to apply multiple imbuements to a single run, and these multiple combinations don't just like stack the 2 buffs together. Every single combination of these 5 with combos of 2, every one of
I think I'll guess I'll see.